Have you ever felt like your child is able to do something, but they just won't? Like when they want to go to the zoo, they suddenly run to put on their shoes. But on school mornings, you end up putting their shoes on for them every single day. Or they won't get their own snack when you're around. But the moment they really want candy or a treat, they somehow manage to get it themselves. And your mind starts trying to make sense of this. So they can do it. They're capable. Then why won't they do it with me? And slowly, almost without realizing it, another meaning creeps in. They're being defiant. They're choosing this. They can do it, they just won't. They're doing this to me on purpose. And once that meaning takes hold, something shifts inside you. You feel frustrated, maybe angry, maybe trapped or taken advantage of. Your body tightens, your patience drops, your reactions get bigger. If you're parenting a PDA or highly demand-avoidant child, this moment is incredibly common and incredibly dysregulating. And here's what I want you to know. That reaction that comes when your child seemingly won't do something is so common. Why? Because it's a very old, very conditioned belief that just got activated in your nervous system. And that belief is some flavor of, my child could do better, but won't. And this is the number one belief that gets activated in so many of us parenting PDA kids. So in this episode, we're going to slow this moment way down, where we'll explore where this belief comes from, why it's so deeply ingrained, and why it triggers such intense reactions in parents, even when we understand PDA. And most importantly, we'll look at how to begin shifting this belief in a way that actually works, not through willpower or positive thinking, but through your nervous system. So if you've ever felt confused about your child's abilities and unsettled by your own reactions, this episode is for you. Let's begin. So I used to feel deeply confused about my son's abilities. Okay, there were many everyday things he didn't want to do for himself, like getting his own snacks, putting things away, cleaning up after himself, even brushing his teeth. It genuinely seemed like he wasn't able to. So I would step in and do it for him. But then things would happen that completely unsettled me. On nights when he stayed up late and I went to bed, I would wake up the next morning to find that he had gone into the fridge or cupboards and gotten his own food. And other times when he was alone, I would notice him organizing things or putting items away, things he had refused to do earlier when I was around. And my brain immediately tried to make sense of it. So he can do these things. And then that's when another thought crept in. Okay, one that just didn't feel good at all. Okay, then the thought is, then why won't he do them when I'm there? So slowly, almost without realizing it, my nervous system began to interpret this as willful, defiant, on purpose. And with that interpretation came something else. I started getting frustrated. I started getting angry. I felt manipulated and taken advantage of. I would think things like, why am I always the one doing everything? Why does he suddenly become capable when I'm not around? Is he just refusing because he knows I'll step in? And then I often heard echoes in my head of judgment from outside professionals, extended family, or friends saying things like, you just need to stop doing things for him and he'll do it himself, which left me feeling ashamed, as if accommodating him meant I was somehow being a bad parent. So then my reactions would escalate, my tone would harden, my body would tense. And without meaning to, I began seeing my child through a lens of intentional refusal rather than nervous system stress. I share this because I hear versions of this story from parents all the time. Okay, my child refuses to put on their shoes or do anything for themselves, but the moment it's something they really want, suddenly they can do it. And the question that follows is almost always the same. Is this a motivation issue, a will issue, a choice? Are they doing this on purpose? And this is where a very specific belief often takes root. Okay, so let's examine this belief that quietly takes hold in our system and makes us react. So, for many parents of PDA children and highly sensitive children who are demand avoidant, a belief begins to form or emerge, often unconsciously. So I would say it more emerges because I feel like it is within us. It's often unconsciously buried within us and dictates how we see things. Okay. And that belief is my child could do better, but won't. Okay. And it can sound like these are other variations. So it can also sound like, oh, they're capable, they're just refusing, or they're choosing this. Okay. Or if they really wanted to, they could stop. Or if they really wanted to, they would do it. Okay. And they don't care how this affects me. Most parents don't want to believe this. Okay. But when we see inconsistency and when a child can do something sometimes and not others, then the brain fills in the gap using the meanings it already knows. And those meanings run deep. Okay. So to understand why this belief is so powerful, we really have to zoom out. So let's zoom out and understand how we were all conditioned, okay, to believe that behavior is about will. Okay, so for so much of history, human behavior has been understood through the lens of will, effort, and character. Okay, so if someone wasn't doing what was expected, the explanation was simple. They didn't want to badly enough. Okay, so later, through the behaviorism era, right, because this is all under the era of patriarchy and behaviorism reinforced this idea in a different form. Okay, behavior was framed as something driven by motivation, reinforcement, and consequences. And if behavior didn't change, the assumption was that the incentive wasn't strong enough or that the person simply wasn't trying hard enough. And so many of us were raised inside families, schools, and systems that were shaped by this worldview. And when you're young, like 0 to 7 years old, your brain unconsciously absorbs all of this like a sponge, and like all of it is truth. Okay? So keep that in mind. You're really young and you're absorbing all of these ways of seeing things and behavior as truth, right? Okay, so we have layers of this, right? Of cultural messages like, if you just try hard enough, you can do anything. Okay, that's a big one. Where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah. Oh, and there's some truth to that, right? There is some truth. Like we've all had experiences where there is some truth to that, but it's not always true, is it? Right? Even sometimes we have the will, but we don't have the way or the wherewithal. Okay. Or other cultural messages like, oh, don't make excuses. Okay. Like, how many times have we heard that? So underneath all these messages sits the same core assumption, okay, that capacity to do something is somehow a choice, right? And that effort creates ability. Okay, but for many of us, that didn't stay a belief. It actually became a survival strategy. Okay, so let's talk about that. That when this belief becomes survival wiring within us and then clashes with our demand avoidant kids. Okay, so let's just understand for many of us, this conditioning wasn't just abstract. Okay, it was relational. This belief was built through our relationships with our caregivers. So as children, when we struggled or froze or resisted or couldn't meet expectations, we were often seen as lazy, defiant, rebellious, unmotivated. Okay, and that didn't just feel bad, it threatened belonging. So the nervous system adapted. Okay, many of us learned to push ourselves past our limits, right? Override our bodies, force compliance, force ourselves to comply, okay? Or prove our worth through effort. And here's the part that really locks this belief in, okay? When we did succeed under pressure, right? We use these survival strategies of pressure to try to succeed. And when we did, the nervous system concluded, see, it really was about will. You just weren't trying hard enough before. Okay? Cue shame, and then not wanting to feel shame, and then going into the survival strategy of pressure. So there's pressure, override, you get success from it, the belief is reinforced. Okay, so this pattern often followed us into adulthood and then into parenting. And for a long time, we may have believed this pattern was a good one, right? It got us to where we are and it helped us perform and achieve and function in the world, but it came at a cost. Okay, over time, it added a significant stress load to our nervous systems, and it quietly taught us that if we don't push, override, or force ourselves to keep going, then we are somehow not worthy of love, belonging, or success. And this is exactly where things begin to fall apart when we parent our demand-avoidant PDA children from this mental model and belief system. Okay, so let's understand this, why this mental model breaks down or is severely challenged, right? Or like really goes into reaction with our PDA kids, right? So now enters the PDA nervous system into our life, our child. And PDA children do not respond to pressure with increased effort. They respond with loss of access, right? Loss of access to their skills and abilities. So when expectation, demand, or perceived loss of autonomy shows up, the nervous system detects threat. And when threat is detected, capacity does not increase, it disappears completely. Okay, they do not develop the protective survival strategy to override themselves to please us, although some kids may at times, right? But that's not necessarily consistent, right? Like many neurotypical kids develop this pattern, or like we ourselves did. Okay, what we see instead are more intense reactionary survival responses, right? We see the fight response, we see the flight response, we see the freeze and shut down responses. These states are not defiance, though, okay? And they are not choices or decisions that are willful or come from the higher thinking brain. And they are not failures of motivation or character. They are the nervous system taking over in an attempt to protect because they don't feel safe anymore, okay? And from a neuroscience-based lens, right, which we did not have many hundreds of years ago when patriarchy and behaviorism took root, okay? But now we have this more, nervous science, more new neuroscience and polyvagal theory and nervous system-based understanding, right? That behavior is driven by the nervous system state, right? The autonomic nervous system and what state you're in. It's not driven by will and the higher thinking brain where will really comes from, okay? And state, nervous system state is shaped by one core question. Does this nervous system feel safe right now? Okay, and then everything comes from there. All behaviors come from, does this nervous system feel safe right now? Okay, so this isn't just true for PDA children, it's true for all of us. We all have abilities that exist and a nervous system that determines whether we can access those abilities in any given moment. Okay, so on days when we feel rested, supported, and safe, our capacity is higher. Okay, we all know and understand this, right? Okay, so we can take on more responsibility without it feeling so heavy. We can think clearly, problem solve, and show up with flexibility, right? When we have more capacity. But on days when we're exhausted or overwhelmed or under pressure or caring too much, our capacity drops. So even simple tasks can feel unbearable. the nervous system can push back through resistance, avoidance, procrastination, or shutdown. Okay, not because we lack ability or are using our will to defy, but because our capacity is low. The nervous system's capacity is low that day. So the ability is still there, right? But the nervous system just doesn't have access to it that day. This is why state really can drive behavior. So when we understand this in ourselves, it becomes easier to see what's happening in our children, especially PDA children whose nervous systems are far more sensitive to threat, demand, and pressure, and whose capacity can fluctuate much more dramatically than ours, right? And yet, even when this conscious understanding, even when we have this conscious understanding, right, the subconscious, deeply wired in mental models of behavior, keeps pulling us back into reactionary mode. Okay, so let's take a moment to understand the brain, okay, and look at what neuroscience tells us about how the brain actually works so that we can see why your brain keeps seeing willfulness anyway, even if you have some new mental models and understanding of the new nervous system way of seeing things. Okay, so our brains don't take in reality in a neutral way, right? Like they don't actually see what's actually happening in front of us in a neutral way, okay? It's always biased. Our brains filter reality based on the beliefs and meanings that we already hold from past experiences and conditioning. And what this means, and so this is like all the new neuroscience, okay, about the predictive brain, okay? So this is where we can understand things so much more. So what this means is that if deep down, often unconsciously, we hold the belief that a person's ability depends on their willingness, then our brain will automatically filter behavior through that meaning, okay? It will selectively notice the parts of behavior that confirm the belief. So in other words, the brain doesn't look for new explanations. It looks for more evidence of what it already believes. And so that means the brain just simply creates more of the same. Okay? So early meanings become these mental models, right? And those models shape what the brain notices and what it ignores. Okay? And under chronic stress, which is extremely common in PDA parenting, this filtering system becomes even more rigid and threat biased. Okay, so this is where what's called the reticular activating system, or RAS, comes in, okay? And the RAS is a system in the brainstem that decides what gets noticed, what gets prioritized, and what gets filtered out. Okay, so when the RAS is threat-based, it flags behavior through the lens of our old mental models, right? Which are deeply wired in, like those pathways that have been well traveled, right? Okay, so it might interpret that this behavior is refusal, right? Or inconsistency is evidence that this is about motivation and will, okay? Or that moments when your child seems capable, it sees it as proof that, oh, they are capable. And therefore, if they're not doing it now, they're choosing not to do it now. Okay, and at the same time, the brain filters out any signs of overwhelm, right? It's not reading the signs of overwhelm in your child, or reading the signs of nervous system collapse, or seeing things through the role of safety and threat in determining access to capacity, right? It's filtering all that out, and it's only filtering in what drives the old mental model, okay? So even when you understand PDA intellectually, your brain may still interpret behavior through old meanings, especially when you're tired, triggered, or scared. Okay, and those meanings don't just shape what you see, they of course shape how your nervous system ends up reacting. Okay, so why this belief creates such strong reactions in parents? Okay, so the moment the brain believes that they could, but they won't, your nervous system responds accordingly. Okay, so of course, anger makes sense, frustration makes sense, right? And urgency makes sense, right? Feeling like it's your responsibility to change your child. Because now the situation is framed as there is a problem that should be fixable and it isn't being fixed. So that meaning alone can push parents into a fight response, right? Either pushing, correcting, insisting, or then disconnecting by not giving in and accommodating, right? Or it can result in a collapse or a shame response, right? Of feeling like, why can't I handle this better? And I'm failing as a parent. So this isn't a parenting flaw. It's a nervous system responding to the meaning it is seeing this all through. So the real question becomes, what actually has to change? So let's get into what actually has to change. So shifting this belief, okay, it's not about forcing yourself to think differently or trying to get your child to change, right? It's really about updating the nervous system and the meanings it's running. Okay, so that begins with 3 key recognitions. Okay, so number 1, recognize how deep this conditioning goes, right? So instead of arguing with the belief, start with curiosity and ask yourself, where did I learn this? Right? Where did I learn that someone's ability is about their willingness and their effort? And if they're not doing it, then they're just not willing and being defiant. Like, where did I learn this? Okay, and just sit with that quietly and ask that question inside and let the answer come spontaneously. Or ask yourself, who taught me that effort equals worth? Right? Who taught me that? Or what happened to me when I couldn't comply or perform, right? And then what beliefs did I take on about myself then? Okay, so seeing the origin of the belief softens shame and opens space for compassion. Okay, once we understand where the belief came from, then we can have more clarity, right? We can see the truth of how this got conditioned into us, and then we can begin to work with it instead of against it. Okay, number 2, gently update the brain's models, okay? Not through logic, but through safety first, right? Because we're already trying to update our models and see things through a nervous system lens for many of us, right? But then we're still defaulting to this reactionary mode of seeing things in this old view, right? So we want to bring in safety first and help update the meanings in our brain and nervous system through safety first. So beliefs formed in survival don't change through reasoning alone. Okay, they change when the nervous system feels safe enough to take in new meaning. Okay, so this is where the practice of havening can be powerful. And I teach this in my course, and there are lots of good YouTube videos on havening. But I'm gonna introduce a little bit of the practice here for you. So havening is a psychosensory modality that uses gentle, repetitive touch, okay, typically on the hands. So you apply this, it's like washing your hands movement, and you apply the pace and pressure that you like. And then on the arms, so you're doing a moving hug on your arm. So it's like a moving rubbing of your arms from your shoulders down to your elbows, or it can be on the face, on your forehead and cheeks. Okay. And this modality uses this gentle, repetitive touch to calm the amygdala. Okay. There's lots of amazing research on how touch can really calm the threat center of the brain, right? And neurocept safety. So when the amygdala settles, right, and brings more calm into the body, then the brain becomes more open to perspective, context, and learning new meanings and taking in new meanings. So we use havening touch to calm the amygdala and the nervous system. And then while we're doing this, we can invite in new meanings using curiosity rather than force. So I invite you to apply havening touch, okay, on your hands, on your arms, and on your face, okay? And then with genuine curiosity, use what if, okay? We're going to use what if because it stimulates so much curiosity and gets neuroplasticity going. Okay, and we're going to and I'm inviting you to try one to say these to yourself as you apply havening touch. So what if, okay, with a lot of curiosity here, what if my child's capacity disappears when their nervous system feels threatened? What if? Okay, or what if this behavior is a loss of access, not a lack of willingness? What if this behavior is a loss of access and not a lack of willingness? Or what if my child isn't choosing this, but their nervous system is taking over, or their nervous system just doesn't feel safe, right? What if my child isn't choosing this, but their nervous system is taking over or doesn't feel safe? Okay, or what if safety, not pressure, is what brings capacity back online? Okay, what if safety, not pressure, is what brings capacity back online? So you are not trying to convince yourself of these beliefs, right? You're simply inviting the possibility of seeing things differently. And when you apply havening touch with that, it really opens your amygdala and your brain to taking in that new possibility. Okay. And saying it with a lot of curiosity stimulates neuroplasticity. And then this whole practice then tells the brain, we're safe enough to explore this new meaning and take in this new meaning. And then it starts to orient your brain to that new meaning. So if you practice this every day for 2 minutes a day, even, your brain is going to start to orient to that new meaning, right? And when you invite in these new beliefs, you are allowing your nervous system to experience a different explanation, okay? One that removes moral judgment and restores accurate context, right? Accurate context of what behaviors mean. And when the nervous system has context, it no longer has to stay in defense, believing the old meaning. So then urgency softens, anger has somewhere to go and be relieved. The brain's threat filter, including the reticular activating system, begins to relax and filter in data to go towards the new meaning now. Okay, so from this place, regulation and choice become possible again, okay? Not because your child has changed, but because the meaning your nervous system is operating from has changed, right? And now it's filtering everything outside from this new perspective. Okay, and finally, there is one more layer to this work. Okay, so number 3 is about recognizing how you see your child is really connected to how you see yourself. Okay, so this part may take time to land for some of you. Okay, but often the way we interpret our child's behavior mirrors how we were taught to interpret our own struggles. Okay, so ask yourself gently, like, how many times did I believe if I try harder, I'll succeed? Okay, what am I afraid would happen if I stopped believing that? Okay, and what feelings would surface if I fully let go of this belief? Okay, for many parents, the answers touch into some grief or shame and old wounds around worth, effort, and beliefs like, I am not worthy or lovable if I'm being willful or defiant. Okay. Or if I'm not doing something, it means it must be because I'm lazy, resistant, or choosing not to. That's a big one. That's a big one. Okay, so when these beliefs were formed early, we often developed protective strategies to be the opposite, right? Because these beliefs were part of a wounding experience, right? We took on these beliefs due to a wounding experience, and now we form these protective strategies, to be the opposite of that belief, right? To try harder, to perform more, to override ourselves in order to stay safe and accepted and loved and valued in this world. Okay, so this is what happens, and so the belief doesn't stay, okay, because it's true, because it's not true. It's like a version of truth, but it's not the truth. It stays because it was shown to us when we were younger that it was truth, right? Because of the way our caregivers responded and or the way, society responded, and we unconsciously accepted it as truth. Okay, so over time, these performance-based strategies that we formed became a way of protecting ourselves from feeling the pain, right, that was created by that belief, that was created by that wound in the first place. Okay, so it's really important to understand that. Okay, so let's understand also in closing here that there is this larger shift that we're being invited into as parents of hypersensitive high needs PDA kids. Okay. So shifting this belief really matters. I think it's such an important belief to shift, and not just for our own families, but really for the world that we are a part of shaping. Okay, so for a long time, our culture has interpreted behavior through judgment, through will, and through moral failure. Okay, and that lens has caused immense harm, okay, especially to children, to neurodivergent people, and to anyone whose nervous system doesn't function well under pressure. Okay, so shifting this belief is part of a much larger movement. Okay, it's learning to see human behavior through a nervous system and trauma-informed lens. So when we stop asking, why won't they, and start asking, what's happening in their nervous system, we change not only how we parent, but how we relate, educate, support, and care for one another. Okay? And many of our children, especially PDA and highly sensitive children, are leading us there. They are showing us, often through struggle, that pressure doesn't create health, that safety matters more than compliance, and that capacity, what a nervous system can access at any given moment, is shaped by safety, not a reflection of character, effort, or intent. Okay? So when we do this work, we are not just helping our children, we are participating in a quieter, deeper shift toward a more compassionate and humane world. Okay, and that work begins, as so much of this healing work does, with us parents first. So I hope this podcast resonated with you. And if it did, please comment, please share with others. I'm sure other parents would love to hear this messaging too. Thank you.